Hi, this is Joe Walensky. I'm talking from my office in Seattle, and I'm visiting with some of the speakers who will be presenting at our UA boot camp coming up in Seattle in April. And I'm speaking right now with Scott DeLoach. Hello, Scott.
Hi, Joe.
Where are you at today?
Miami Beach.
All right. Well, I know you travel a lot, so it looks like you're home. So, are you in your new place now?
I am. Yep, I just moved in. Still doing some construction, but yeah, it's going pretty well.
So what kind of things are you involved in? You're always doing a lot of teaching, a lot of contracting work. So what's taking up a lot of your time right now?
Right now it's about 50-50 teaching and consulting. I have some pretty interesting consulting projects. A lot of my projects right now are trying to develop design and content where it works well in print, mobile, and online. It's kind of an interesting challenge. So I've been doing a lot of that design work for some different projects. So yeah, it's exciting.
So any which classes are you working on right now?
We have with Madcap, I kind of partner and teach a CSS class that's really popular, and then the general Flair class, and now we'll be launching Doc to Help training partnership with my company and Madcap coming up in about a month.
Yeah, because that's all new. Doc to Help moved over from being owned by Component One Grape City, and it's a Madcap property now. So you're working along with that right now?
Oh yeah, it'll be pretty exciting. We have a whole new training class for Doc to Help that'll launch. And we'll tie it into some of the Madcap training. There'll be a migration path if you want to move from one product to the other. So yeah, there's a lot going on with DocHelp. It's really cool what they're doing with it.
Well, you mentioned the your cascading style sheets class was pretty popular, and that's obviously an important web standard for us as user assistance professionals to be familiar with and use in our daily work. It's also one of the talks that's in the basic training part of the UA boot camp. So the track that's for people newer to the profession. So you're going to be talking about some of the core web standards and competencies. So maybe tell us a little bit about what types of things you think are important and in what way for user assistance related to web technologies.
Sure. Okay. I think you have to begin with HTML. I don't think that people right now really need to be able to write HTML by hand. It's great if you can, but I think you need to know all the basic tags of HTML. Like even spending 2 hours just knowing about 10 tags, p tag, heading one tag, etc. That's pretty vital. So I think that's just the basic. You have to know that to write any kind of online content. Adding on to that, the next thing I would learn would be CSS, cascading style sheets. In the class, the first thing we start with are just the concepts. What's the difference between inline formatting and actually using styles? Which for some people that's brand new. You have to know that difference, or you're just going to make a giant mess of things. And then I think the biggest concept that's part of CSS is inheritance. You have to understand what inheritance is and how it works and how you can take advantage of it. Because if you don't understand that, it just works against you. And it's really, really confusing. I kind of equate it to people as it's like algebra. You have to understand how the concepts work and have it click in your mind, or it's just always baffling and you fight with it the whole time. But once it clicks, then it makes sense. So I think inheritance is a big part of it. To extend it on, like I was talking about, a lot of people right now are focusing on mobile, and that's going to get bigger and bigger. And that ties in a lot to CSS. So you need to understand how to set up things so that they adapt. They're responsive for CSS and mobile devices and desktop. And what's come up more and more for me is print as well. So making it adapt to all three at the same time. So it can be a pretty difficult challenge, but it's an important challenge you need to be prepared for. As if you don't design in that direction, you're going to design yourself into a corner. So
Well,
I think those are the key things.
yeah, well, with that HTML, I think for a long time, at least personally, I've known, kind of the basics of everything I've needed, and I've known that for a long time. And I think most people have that as more or less a foundation core things that they're familiar with. But on the cascading style sheet side, I find that it's all over the place in terms of what people's competencies are in that area, with a lot of people not knowing much about it at all. It's just a black box, which
Yeah.
I think it's somewhat limiting. I think unless if you don't know enough about it, like you're talking about, you can't. Like, there's so many websites where you could look at interesting techniques to be able to use that you
Mm.
might not find out of the box in an auth in a help authoring tool, but you then need to know how to be able to exploit that, bring that into whatever you're working on. And so I think there needs to be a higher level of competency and understanding how cascading style sheets work.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's if you go out to a website and it has code examples like jQuery, you can take that as a discrete block and put it in your website, and probably nothing else on your website is going to interfere with that. So when you get that working, it works and it's okay. CSS isn't like that. You can't really grab some code and put it in your style sheet and expect it to work because of that inheritance and the way the styles interact. It may work, it may not. And if it doesn't work, if you don't know CSS, there's no way you're going to figure out how to fix it. It's just a different technology and how it's set up.
yeah, one of the challenges that I still find with CSS is that I don't use it so much that I can just rip through syntax without going into a lot of reference, and so I end up using a CSS tool specifically for that purpose to be able to generate the different kinds of effects that I want.
Hmm.
I haven't found that the capabilities of a tool like that are necessarily in the traditional help authoring tools that a lot of us work with. And so I end up doing things in a dedicated CSS editor and then migrating that over to things I work with. But do you have any input from students in your CSS classes about how they tend to do things? I know a lot of it's tied into flair for what you do.
Yeah, the CSS class I usually teach is a part of Flare. Most of it is just general CSS, but we usually use Flare for the editing, so we use their tool. That is one of the things I like about Flare. Now, other tools have this, but I like that it really has two CSS editors in it. So that's nice because they're very different from each other. So you can pick the more techie one where you can do anything you want, but you have to know what you're doing. Or you can pick one that more works like Word. It opens a dialog box. You can change the font and the size. You don't have to really know the names of the things you're changing, like font size or anything. It just says size and you change it. So it has sort of this training wheels where you can start with a basic editor and then go to an advanced editor. And you can still go into it and just edit it, like a text editor as well. So it really has three if you want to count that. So most people, I start them out on a basic one and move to advanced, and then we look at the text editor at the end because that scares some people. But yeah, I use TopStyle a lot. I use those three. I use Notepad. I use TopStyle. I just move all around. I catch myself writing it by hand most of the time because that's how I learned, and I just revert back to that.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, when I
TopStyle
use
is
I'll use Adobe Dreamweaver, and so that that's just a full on. It has a great editor where
yeah.
you can just start typing in syntax that you want to work with, and then it starts populating the actual attributes and things like that, prompting you for the things that you're gonna have to put in. So I think well, at least that's always helpful for me. And then once I put a prototype together, then I can import that into any other tool that I happen to be working with.
Yeah, I like Dreamweaver a lot, and some of the students use Dreamweaver. I usually recommend TopStyle because they have a free version, so it's sort of you can try it out, and then if it works for you, then you can buy it. The paid version has what you're talking about, it populates and things like that. So it's like Dreamweaver just for CSS.
Well, maybe I'll
It's a
try
good,
that out with, I have a production and a production class coming up in the tech writing certificate program at the University of Washington starting in April. So maybe we'll try and use that as our free CSS tool.
cool.
The other topic you're going to be talking about is in our grad school track, so the more advanced session related to responsive design with user assistance. You did write a guest article in the second edition of my book on developing user assistance for mobile UA, and you talked about a way to be able to integrate responsive design and adaptive content with Flare projects. But and just generally, what types of things are you uh, talking to people about with respect to responsive design?
I use it a lot to solve that challenge with a writing style and how it needs to be most likely more concise for a mobile device than a desktop device. So I'll set up styles where when they sense you're on a bigger screen, more information might appear, and that information that maybe even if essential might disappear or at least appear in a different way on a smaller device. So I'm using a lot to show and hide content to just show the essentials on the mobile output and then add that information back. Or even sometimes adding features like I might use a show hide effect, like a drop down if you want to call it that. So I'll have the drop downs maybe in the desktop version, but I decide, that doesn't, I can't even get that to work because of the small screen. So I'll have that feature hide itself on a mobile device. Pictures are the same way. I'll resize them so they're really small or have a thumbnail effect opposite way on the desktop and obviously not have the thumbnail effect on the phone. So there are a lot of techniques. I really just look at it and design for one or the other, depending on which one's more important. And then I use the responsive design to decide, okay, well, how can I adapt this for the second most important, which is usually the other size, and then the third most important, which is usually the print. So it's a really powerful technique.
And so, are you developing different style sheets for different breakpoints for manipulating the display of the content on different
Not normally
device
separate
types?
style sheets. Sometimes I usually just use a media query inside of it and have one style sheet. But it really depends on how different it is. Sometimes I have to make separate style sheets just because it just gets too complicated in one style sheet. But I try to have one style sheet. It's just easier for me to keep up with it.
And so with media query, uh, like typically, how many different output targets are you currently trying to design for?
I go with desktop, mobile, and print. And then depending on the client that I'm working with, sometimes they have differences between tablet and phone. So then I'll split that out. But most of the time, Flare is one example. The responsive design built into Flare adapts to tablet, phone, and desktop. But when it starts out by default, the phone and the tablet are basically the same. And I've noticed most people leave that the same, the design of it, sort of shell of it. And the writing, the things I'm doing, the smaller piece of it, the topics, also the same. If it doesn't work on a tablet, it's probably not going to work on a phone. So I usually keep those two together. I think it just simplifies everything. And that's what I recommend.
All right, well, look forward to seeing that session at the event. So, we'll see you in Seattle coming up in April, and so just check out those sessions then. So, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk with me about this stuff today.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott.
Bye.